Dear Lord, we pray this Juneteenth prayer to celebrate the glorious day when African American enslaved people were free. We honor the spirit of all enslaved people who toiled, hoped, prayed, and sang with unwavering faith for the day of freedom and jubilee. We hear the strong echoes of their faith as they sang of determination. We thank you, our Father, who created all people of all ages and races as your beloved children. As the family of God, when one suffers, we all suffer. When one rejoices, we all rejoice. And so we rejoice on this day of celebration. We affirm the dignity of each person to their rights of freedom and justice. We celebrate liberators, role models, and leaders who have fought the good fight. May we be vigilant against evils of oppression, prejudice, and exploitation, so we may truly be the land of the free. Amen.
Ms. Browder, if you could take roll.
Mr. Gleaves? Mr. Gleaves?
Present.
Mr. Jacobs?
Present.
Ms. McFarland?
Present.
Mrs. Salvo-Meiskop?
Present.
Mr. Vanover?
Present.
Mrs. Webster? Mr. Anderson?
Present. All right, Council, before you have the minutes, or in your packets for the minutes for May 15, 2024. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
All right, any questions or discussions about the May 15 minutes? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of approving the May 15 minutes as published signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The May 15 minutes are approved with 7 affirmative votes. Next, we have the June 5th meeting minutes were distributed in your packet. Council, what is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I have Ms. Megan Salvo-Meiskop as the second.
Thank you.
Any questions or discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes for June 5th as published signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The June 5th meeting minutes are approved with 7 affirmative votes. All right, next we have on the agenda a proclamation for Mayor Hawkins for Parks and Recreation Month. Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. Proclamation reads, whereas parks and recreation programs are an integral part of the communities throughout this country, including the city of Springdale, and whereas our parks and recreation are vitally important to establishing and maintaining the quality of life in our communities, ensuring the health of all citizens, contributing to the economic and environmental well-being of a community and region, and whereas parks and recreation programs build healthy, active communities that aid in the prevention of chronic disease, provide therapeutic recreation services for those who are mentally or physically disabled, and also improve the mental health and emotional health of all citizens. And whereas parks and recreation programs increase a community's economic prosperity through the increased property values, expansion of local tax base, increased tourism, the attraction and retention of businesses, and crime reduction. And whereas parks and recreation areas are fundamental to the environmental well-being of our community, and whereas parks and natural recreation areas improve water quality, protect groundwater, prevent flooding, improve the quality of air we breathe, provide vegetative buffers to development, and produce habitat for wildlife. And whereas our parks and natural recreation areas ensure the ecological beauty of our community and provide a place for children and adults to connect with nature and recreate outdoors. And whereas the United States House of Representatives has designated July as Parks and Recreation Month, and whereas the city of Springdale recognizes the benefits derived from parks and recreation resources. Now, therefore, I, Lawrence C. Hawkins III, Mayor of the city of Springdale, do hereby proclaim July 2024 as Parks and Recreation Month. Mr. Wilson, you come forward.
Next, we have a presentation. I believe SOS is here to recognize their scholarship winner for this year, or winners.
Thank you. I'm Julie Webster. I'm the treasurer of Springdale Offering Support. I'm here joined by Michelle Miller. She's a fellow SOS board member. So we wanted to publicly present our two recipients, the two recipients that received the two $1,500 scholarships. Our first recipient is Cameron Chambliss. She's been very active in the Key Club, National Spanish Honor Society, and the Student Equity Leadership Council. Cameron is going to UC in the fall. And with that, I'd like to ask Cameron to please come up.
If you can hang out there for a second, our cameraman's a minute behind. Thank you, Brian.
Our second recipient is lifetime resident Gavin Howe. He was very active with the Sailfish Swim Team, a lifeguard, a volunteer coach, and his destination in the fall will be Ohio State University. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Webster. SOS does a lot of good in the community, so we appreciate the opportunity to celebrate their scholarship winners with them. So thank you for coming out tonight. We have a lot of regular business to cover too, so don't feel obligated to stay for all of it, but you're certainly welcome to watch to see how the sausage is made. All right. Next, we have committee and official reports. We'll start with Civil Service Commission with Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, Council. The Civil Service Commission did meet on June 2nd, 6th, that is, in the Springdale Municipal Building, and present was myself, Mr. Darby, Mr. McNair, along with Ms. Morgan, the Human Resource Administrator here at the City of Springdale. Also attending was Public Works Director Michael Hutzel, which was a nice showing for him to be there and to observe and to get a better understanding of what it is that civil service is doing. For my reports, I'll start with the finance account clerk position. That hiring process has concluded with the candidate beginning employment on June 10th. So we're happy to see that has moved forward. The next item was the patrol officer. One candidate is scheduled to begin work on June the 24th, and there's one additional conditional offer pending. The police clerk position, as a result of a refresh of the job posting, that refresh yielded an additional 41 candidates for the position. Following the interviews, one conditional offer was made. Also, the Assistant Director of Public Works, a timeline was presented, and that timeline was approved by the Commission. This position was a result of the vacated position of Mr. Huxell, who is now our Director of Public Works. So that timeline was presented, and it was approved 3-0 by the Commission. And lastly, I just wanted to make the public aware that because our next regularly scheduled meeting was to occur on July the 4th, decision was made by the Commission to move that meeting to July the 11th. That concludes my report, unless there's any questions.
Not seeing any. Thank you, Mr. Coleman.
All right.
All right, next we have rules and law. Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. President. No report.
All right, next, Finance Committee, Mr. Vanover.
Thank you, Mr. President. Reporting the general fund beginning balance was $8,733,669.41. Year-to-date receipts, $11,284,412.85. Year-to-date expenditures, $9,555,393.22, leaving us an unencumbered balance of $9,222,757.13. And that would complete my report.
Not seeing any questions. Thank you, Mr. Vanover. Next, we have Planning Commission, Ms. Sullivan-Wisecup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Planning Commission met on June 11th, and we had 6 people. Al Chang was unavailable. He was at a work conference. We had a very full night. We started off with the Springdale Lake PUD. It's a preliminary plan for major modifications of bodega. It was something that was tabled a few months ago, and they wanted to keep it on the table until our July 9th meeting, which we are. And then we had Springdale Cinema Apartments. This was tabled from the meeting prior, and it was a preliminary plan and map amendment at 505 West Crescentville Road. Millhouse came, and it was for 216 apartments, 96 townhomes, and that was passed 4-2. That will be behind and kind of on the side of where Showcase Cinemas is now. It's the back parking lot and along the side of that. Then on new business, we had Springdale Lake Drive PUD development plan with minor modification for Mallard Lakes Maintenance Garage. This passed 0-6, or it failed 0-6. What they wanted to do was have a shed-like maintenance garage built, and it was not going to be cohesive with the rest of the community, either Mallard Lakes or even the new community. It really wasn't in the same spirit of looking like them, so we had gone ahead and voted that down, and they will be coming back, they said, with another plan. We had Castanelli Square PUD. It was a minor modification for a temporary banner. It was on the old Toys R Us, just said leasing, and we passed that 6-0 to allow them to keep that up for a year. And then we had Tri-County Town Center PUD. It was a minor modification for snowy shaved ice at 11711 Princeton Pike. It is going to be in the parking lot of like Harbor Freight and places like that, and it's just a small little snow cone place, and it's going to be there during the summer months, and that passed with a 6-0 vote. And then finally, we had the City of Springdale Zoning Code Amendment. It had a public hearing attached, and it was for chickens. And after a lot of discussion, and we did have a couple people come and talk, it was decided to table it until we had a better idea of what was going to be in place with the new rules regarding the fowl husbandry and chickens in general. So until we had a better idea of what was going to be going in place if we took this out, it was tabled. And that was tabled 6-0. What do you think?
So
That sounds like it.
one question, there might be another one too after this. On the zone text amendment request, that was the request that came from council to remove a section from the zoning code for then council to decide on. Came in 2 parts. This was independent of those other rules. My only question back to planning is, there's a timeline that's required, it's my understanding, for when those responses come back to council in the charter. I don't know if it's 45 or 90 days. I'd have to ask Mr. Braun. But I just want to make sure that you have a plan to give a response back, because I don't believe you can table that type of request. I think you have to give a response even if it's no action.
We didn't have legal counsel there, and from what was said, our chairperson and actually everyone on council on the planning commission felt very, very strongly that without anything to put in place or without any step two, we were getting rid of it, which makes having chickens completely legal, period. And I think people didn't understand that. And also, there was nothing to put back in. So until we had more information as the planning commission,
Right.
we didn't really have a choice here.
Just understand that the planning commission can get back a no or incomplete answer back to council because they're still required to respond in that period of time. For what it's worth, for people who aren't familiar, there are two sections where this type of thing are maintained for these domestic animals, things like chicken, fowl. There's a land use portion of it, and then there's sections in the zoning code. This was just to address the zoning code section, which I think requires a response. But maybe we don't need to do this here on the fly. Maybe all I'm asking is that maybe planning check back in with Mr. Braun to make sure we're responding the way we
Right,
should.
because it was pointed out by the chairperson that this was in fact it was a land use, so that would go into the zoning code.
Yeah.
So that was the thing, that's why it was still in the zoning code, because it was a land use.
Yeah, so maybe we can follow
Yeah.
back up on that, unless Mr. Braun has thoughts already. Mr. Vanover, you had a question?
Well, my only question was kind of tag team on that. Then if the zoning amendment failed, wouldn't it revert back to the existing code that is in place right now until that becomes changed, correct?
Right, well, that's all things that we could discuss once we get the recommendation back from planning. So what was tabled was planning's recommendation to removing it, not whether or not it's good policy. I mean, that's part of good policy, is part of it. But their recommendation back to council is, it doesn't change the code, this part of the code. It's for council to decide after that. And those are good questions for what would happen, especially if planning committee said, we're not comfortable doing this without a replacement, then council could certainly address that, I think is the process. Mr. Braun, did you have anything to add for that?
Sorry, thank you, Mr. President. I would just say that they're making a recommendation, so one of their recommendations could be, as you pointed out, we think there should be more information before this is approved.
Yeah, when it was brought up with our chairperson, he had just basically said that it was a land use, that there was no reason for a recommendation. And basically, we had to table it because if it comes to council, it becomes a political issue instead of a land use issue. That was his exact words, and I don't agree or disagree with him. It was just what was said as his reasoning. And the rest of us were like, at the same time, I think we all felt until we knew what was happening next, it was kind of hard for us to give a recommendation. Because if the recommendation was to not do it, we didn't know what the alternatives were. If it wasn't,
I only mention that maybe it's not necessarily to put you on the spot to solve that problem. It's just I think planning might need to have a meeting to address it in order to stay in compliance with the charter. Ms. McFarland, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say that there were just a lot of questions that I needed to touch base with administration or the mayor or the law director, and we didn't have those answers to give. So I would agree with Megan. I don't think anybody felt comfortable approving or disapproving anything. There were a lot of strong feelings. So, and unfortunately, I had no idea.
No, you're fine. And again, this isn't to put you on the spot or wag my finger. I just want to make sure we stay in compliance with the charter and our ordinances, which I believe say that planning does need to respond in a certain period of time. If you need to have additional meetings, you're empowered to have those meetings set up, and the chairperson can do that. And if you need Mr. Braun's help or administration's help, I'm sure they'd be available. So what caused concern for me is when you said that tabled until, some unknown period. And but even the next meeting might be too late. So you just might want to check on that. All right? All right. A lot of discussion for the chickens. All right. Any other questions or feedback for planning, the planning report? All right. Not seeing any. Thank you for that. Next, we have Board of Zoning Appeals, Mr. Gleaves.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no report.
All right. Board of Health, Ms. McFarland.
Thank you, Mr. President. No report.
Capital Improvements, Ms. Sullivan-Weisskopf.
thank you, Mr. President, no report.
OKI, that's me. OKI did meet on June 13, 2024. The board met. There was 2 items, just so people are aware of what's going on in OKI. Again, OKI did have a discussion at length about the charter amendment that's before City of Cincinnati residents, and people might see news articles about it. For people who aren't familiar, OKI is a funding organization that gives millions of dollars of federal funding that flows through them to cities like ours. So the Northland Boulevard project, for example, has gotten $3 to $4 million through OKI and federal funds that come through this board. We have representation on it, we vote on it, that money gets distributed. There's an amendment before it that could change the membership and some of the core rules. Just so people know out there, if you read things about OKI and think, how does that affect Springdale? It doesn't. The board is not affected, as far as we know, by either way that Cincinnati votes for the upcoming issue in November, and they made that really clear. But if you have questions about it or see articles and say, does that affect us, feel free to reach out. The other thing the board did is we approved our 2025 budget and approved the 2050 Metropolitan Plan. If anyone wants to look at it and is really interested in infrastructure, the URL is 2050update.oki.org. The 2050 is in numbers. It talks about what we see the future of transportation being in the region. It includes high-level goals and targets for funding for things, so how that money gets down to it. You're talking about steering a huge ship of hundreds of millions of dollars. It also includes things like how does the Brent Spence Bridge affect the region, and how does that affect how we build our roads in Springdale. All of that is included in that plan. So if you're interested, that's where you would get that information. The last thing the board did is we did approve an update to the TIP grants to include several funding approvals for safer streets projects, and I think Springdale might have been on one of those items where we got some additional funding approved through OKI to help with safer streets. That would be bike path marking and sidewalk improvements got funded through that. So all in all, a good day for Springdale at OKI, a good month. Any questions? Not seeing any, we'll move on to the mayor's report. Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since my last report, the pool opening went great, and DJ Steven was on the ones and twos. There's a nice crowd, and I think since then residents have been enjoying the pool. Also on June the 7th, we had a ribbon cutting for La Moralins. Mr. Gleaves was there as well. It's Western Wear in Princeton Plaza. They used to be on Northland Boulevard, so they've relocated. This space is twice the size that their other one was in. And I will tell you, they have a large selection of boots and belts and belt buckles and leather wear, vests, what have you. So good establishment to go check it out, and we wish them well. The Mill Creek Alliance had their event called the Canoes in Conversation. It was back on June 1st. That was in Woodlawn. They had a variety of activities for individuals to canoe down the Mill Creek, bike, go on trails, what have you. It was an excellent opportunity and showing of collaboration. You saw folks from the Mill Creek, you saw folks from the Metropolitan Sewer District. There were individuals from the Army Corps of Engineering to help release water so folks had enough depth to go canoeing down there. And there were a lot of elected officials there from neighboring communities like Evendale, Glendale, Woodlawn, Lincoln Heights. Commissioner Driehaus was present. So it was a nice opportunity to see some collaboration with folks in the region working together moving forward. And lastly, we just completed another year of Civil Service and You program that we do at the city. I know several individuals on the dais have had their kids participate in that. It's a unique program where kids get to go through all the different departments within the city and learn how they function and what they do. I think Tax Commissioner Smitty probably won the award for the best swag given out through the course of that. But the kids truly enjoyed it, and Nathan did a great job putting that on. So that concludes my report.
Thank you. Don't see any questions. All right, next, Administrator's Report. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. Couple things on the parks initially here. The Summer 5K Series program meets every Monday at 6:30 at the Community Center Park Concession. Also, the Director, Charlie Wilson, wanted me to remind folks Thursday, June 20th, tomorrow, we'll have our art in the park at 6:30 to 8:30 and our concert in the park from 7:30 to 9. That will be the Remains. Again, folks are very familiar with that. Ms. Sullivan Wisecup may have her dad occasionally make a guest appearance for that. The indicate that Springdale Youth Boosters will be there selling refreshments, snack items, and so forth at the concession stand. Also, there will be a water station available for those recognizing there's going to be some heat, so try to help with that. And lastly, I'd just like to congratulate the scholarship recipients. Thank you.
Thank you. One question for the concert, and I think you addressed it with the water. I've gotten questions about, in the past for big bad weather, storms especially, we've had concerts canceled. With the water being added, we don't expect the heat to be an issue for the concert and people can plan on attending, or is there still some risk where they should check in with the city site beforehand?
So far, we're going to go forward as planned. Generally speaking, if there's something that comes up with weather and it looks like it's going to be an issue, Mr. Wilson will make a recommendation to our mayor, and then the mayor will let us know how he wants us to proceed. They always will notify, they'll make sure that notification gets out there on Facebook and different things pretty quickly if they make a decision to.
But we don't think the heat's going to be an issue, other than it being hot.
We hope not.
All right.
Thank
you. Next, Law Director's report, Mr. Braun.
Thank you, Mr. President. No report.
Engineers report, Mr. Riggs.
Thank you. Yeah, I only have 3 quick updates. The Northland Boulevard Reconstruction Project, ODOT awarded that contract to Jurgensen Company, and the pre-bid or pre-construction meeting is actually being held tomorrow. Then the West Crescentville Road project, Barrett Paving is expected to start resurfacing that stretch as early as next week. Then the Tri-County Parkway Extensions project, the sidewalk extension, that actually was advertised today, and the bid opening is scheduled to be held on July 11th. That's all I have.
All right, I don't see any questions. Thank you. Next, Rental Program Committee, Mr. Vanover.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't have any direct report except that we are nearing, hopefully, the end collection of data and surveys, and anticipate we will reestablish a meeting here shortly.
Next, the Urban Farming Special Committee, Ms. McFarland.
Thank you, Mr. President. No report.
All right, next we have, next on the agenda, that ends the committee and fish reports. Next on the agenda is communications. Ms. Browder, do we have any communications for council?
Thank you, Mr. President. No communications.
All right. That brings us to item 10 on the agenda, which is communications from the audience. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to address council for any reason, this is your opportunity. If you wanted to, you'd come to the podium, you'd sign in to the sheet and state your name and address, and then you'd have up to 5 minutes to address council. So the floor is now open.
Good evening. My name is Terry Richardson, 12194 Springdale Lake Drive.
Sheila Glaze, 12145 Springdale Lake Drive.
So I'd like to say happy Juneteenth to everyone. And if you'll indulge us for a few minutes, we would like to present to you, or share with you, a brief historical legacy of Juneteenth, as well as a synopsis of one woman's decade-long fight to make Juneteenth a U.S. holiday. On Freedom's Eve, or the eve of January 1st, 1863, the first watch night services took place. On that night, enslaved and free African Americans gathered in churches and private homes all across the country, awaiting news that the Emancipation Proclamation had taken effect. At the stroke of midnight, prayers were answered as all enslaved people in Confederate states were declared legally free. Union soldiers, many of whom were Black, marched into plantations and across cities in the South, reading small copies of the Emancipation Proclamation, spreading the news of freedom in Confederate states. Only through the 13th Amendment did emancipation end slavery throughout the United States. But not everyone in Confederate territory would immediately be free. Even though the Emancipation Proclamation was made effective in 1863, it could not be implemented in places still under Confederate control. As a result, in the westernmost Confederate state of Texas, enslaved people would not be free until much later. freedom finally came on June 19, 1865, when some 2,000 Union troops arrived in Galveston Bay, Texas. The Army announced that the more than 250,000 enslaved Black people in the state were free by executive decree. This day came to be known as Juneteenth by the newly freed people in Texas. The post-emancipation period, known as Reconstruction, which spanned the period 1865 through 1877, marked an era of great hope, uncertainty, and struggle for the nation as a whole. Formerly enslaved people immediately sought to reunify families, establish schools, run for political office, push radical legislation, and even sue slaveholders for compensation. Given the 200-plus years of enslavement, such changes were nothing short of amazing. Not even a generation out of slavery, African Americans were inspired and empowered to transform their lives and their country. Juneteenth marks our country's second Independence Day. Although it has been long celebrated in the African American community, this monumental event remains largely unknown to most Americans. The historical legacy of Juneteenth shows the value of never giving up hope in uncertain times.
There were many people that worked to bring Juneteenth a holiday, but no one was more dedicated than 97-year-old Opal Lee, affectionately known as Grandmother of Juneteenth, for her years of tireless and efforts by walking to bring attention to Juneteenth. Today and every day, and every Juneteenth, she walks 2.5 miles to recognize the 2.5 years it took for the news of freedom to reach enslaved people of Texas. Thank you.
Thank you for that information. We appreciate it. It's a good history note.
Thank you.
All right, the floor is still open if anyone else would like to address council for any reason. Mr. Coleman, I still need you to sign in.
Still be some. First of all, I want to say thank you to the two ladies who brought that information, making all the listeners more aware of the significance of Juneteenth. That was very well done. Appreciate that. Second, I would address this to Ms. Sullivan Weiss Cup, because there's been so many questions about the status of Wawa. Would you please let the public know, to the best of your ability, what's going on with that particular project?
Ms. Sullivan Weiss Cup. If you have the information, otherwise there might be other people.
I would like to refer that to administration. All I can say is every time I drove past, I go, yes, Wawa's coming. I don't know about anybody else, but that's what I say.
I only addressed it to Ms. Sullivan Weisskopf because I know she's been getting lots of questions about that as well. So.
I do get lots of questions about it, and that's how I answer it. But administration, if you have a better answer, please.
Do we have, we might not have more information today. I know the site's been cleared. I drive there every other day, and they're moving earth, I can tell you that. And more people are noticing, although the news doesn't seem as interested in our Wawa as others, but that's fine. When it opens, we'll make a big splash. Is there anything else you wanted to add, or Mr. Ewell?
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't believe we have a date yet for an opening, but I do believe it is expected to be open before the end of the year. I think sometime maybe late October, early November-ish. It's probably a fair guesstimate.
I understand they're somewhat known for their pumpkin spice coffee, so I would assume they'll open right around the time that's a critical component for people that are interested in that thing. Sorry, Mr. Coleman, yes, did you have another comment?
So I will say that information is in of itself an update. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, the floor is still open. If anyone else would like to address council or Ms. Sullivan Weisskopf directly, please feel free.
name is Cole Spradlin. I live on 870 York Haven Road. Kind of forgot about the Wawa. However, now that we are breaking ground, do we have a set date on when the reconstruction for the intersection or the improvements for the intersection will happen?
I don't know if administration or Mr. Riggs has that information or needs to go back and look. Mr. Yule?
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't believe we have a set date on when any of that's going to occur, but we're trying to get some grant funding as well to help with those roadway improvements. Mr. Riggs, I don't know if you have anything to add by way of timeline or not.
Mr. Riggs?
No, I don't have anything to add. I know they've been working on addressing the last minute plan review comments, but so I would expect it to be very close to the time we're opening.
Mr. Braun?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just indicated to Mr. Yule, I can tell you all the legal stuff's been recorded. So on the legal end, all the paperwork is done, so.
So progress. I think we saw, the legal documents might have been interesting to people like you, but when we saw the earth movers come in is when we started to get excited. All right. The floor is still open if anyone else would like to address council for any reason. Second call. Third and final call. All right, I'm closing communications from the audience. Next, we'll move on to ordinances and resolutions. Before we start ordinance 21-2024, the chair is open to accepting a motion to amend this ordinance, adding an emergency clause and section 5 explaining the emergency clause, if anyone would like to make that motion.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded in order to amend the ordinance that was read at our last meeting to add an emergency clause and the section 5. All the changes are recorded in what was submitted at the dais today. Are there any questions or discussion about the motion to amend? Again, for people who weren't at the meeting last time, the original ordinance that we were going to be discussing did not have the emergency clause because we wanted to make sure that the public had enough notice and we'd be reading it more than once. Emergency clause ordinances don't typically require 2 readings, but we want the ordinance, if it passes, to take effect on signature for reasons we discussed at the last meeting, which is why we're doing the amendment today, or it's proposed. All right. Seeing no discussion, Ms. Browder, if you poll council to amend ordinance 21-2024 as distributed.
Aye.
Mrs. Sullivan Wisecup?
Aye.
Ms. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Vanover?
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves?
Aye.
Mrs. Webster? Aye. Mr. Anderson?
Aye. Ordinance 2021 has been amended per the packet that was distributed. So at this point, Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready, please read ordinance 2024 as amended.
I believe it's ordinance 21-2024.
I'm sorry, 21-2024.
Ordinance 21-2024, an ordinance approving a zoning code text amendment to remove the prohibition of medical marijuana cultivation, processing, and retail dispensaries, and to adopt text amendments to allow for the location of marijuana dispensaries, processing, and cultivation businesses in the city of Springdale, and declaring an emergency. Whereas on May 14, 2024, the City of Springdale Planning Commission met and considered text amendments to the City of Springdale zoning code that would change section 153.254D to remove the prohibition of medical marijuana cultivation, processing, and retail dispensaries, and change the text sections 153.253 table 253-1, 153.253D, and 153.600 to adopt standards for the location of marijuana dispensaries, processing and cultivation businesses in the City of Springdale, collectively the amendments, and whereas Planning Commission, in considering the amendments, recommended their approval, and whereas on June 14, 2024, after proper notice having been given, Council of the City of Springdale held a public hearing to gather input from the public and consider the proposed amendments. And whereas upon conclusion of the public hearing, the Council of the City of Springdale considered in an open meeting the proposed amendments to the City of Springdale zoning code and the recommendation of Planning Commission. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring section 1. The recommendation of the City of Springdale Planning Commission to remove the prohibition of medical marijuana cultivation, processing, and retail dispensaries in the City of Springdale zoning code, and to change the text of sections 153.253 table 253-1, 153.253D, and 153.600 to adopt standards for marijuana dispensaries, processing, and cultivation businesses are hereby approved, and the amendments to the City of Springdale zoning code are granted subject to the city staff, city engineer, and city planner's recommendations and considerations contained in their reports, and approval of any covenants by city staff and the law directors determined to be necessary. A copy of the amendments as approved by Planning Commission are attached as Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference. Section 2, council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 3, this ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law. Section 4, this ordinance shall be an emergency measure necessary for the preservation of the public peace, health, safety, and general welfare, and shall, subject to the terms of Article 2D, 3D of the Charter, be effective immediately. The reason for the emergency is to ensure immediate implementation of this legislation to begin regulating the zoning related to businesses in this industry as provided in the legislation without any delay.
All right, there is a public hearing attached to this ordinance before we take action on it. So at this point, I will open the public hearing related to Ordinance 21, 2024, which does include an emergency clause to enact. If anyone in the public would like to speak for or against this ordinance, this is your opportunity. Just like in communications to council, you'd simply come to the podium, state your name and address, sign in, and give us any feedback you'd like related to this ordinance. At this point, the floor is open for the public hearing. Second call. Third and final call. At this point, I'm closing the public hearing related to Ordinance 21, 2024, which includes the emergency clause. Having completed the public hearing and heard the reading of the ordinance, council, what is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Moved and seconded. Questions or discussions related to this ordinance? Ms. Sullivan-Weiskamp.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just again remind everyone that this did go to Planning Commission last month and a half ago, and it did pass unanimously before it came here. Thank you.
All right. See no other, I will also advise council to remind you that there is a related ordinance that immediately followed this, Ordinance 22, 2024, which we have not enacted. They are closely related, so please keep that in mind as you decide what to do next. All right. At this point, seeing no other questions or discussion, Ms. Browder, if you poll council on Ordinance 21, 2024 with the emergency clause as amended.
Mrs. Sullivan-Weiskamp.
Aye.
Mrs. Webster. Ms. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobs.
Aye.
Mr. Vanover.
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves.
Aye.
Mr. Anderson.
Aye. Ordinance 21, 2024 as amended with the emergency clause is approved 7-0. Next, before we get to Ordinance 22, 2024, again, the chair will accept a motion to amend as distributed in our packets today to add the emergency clause and the related section to it.
So moved.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Are there, again, this was to make sure that it takes into effect right away so that there isn't a gap of 30 days that normally happens after ordinances are passed before the new rules would take effect, where it would be a wild, wild west. Any questions or discussion about the motion to amend to add the emergency clause? All right, seeing none, Ms. Browder, if you poll council on the motion to amend to add the emergency clause and related sections as distributed.
Mr. Jacobs.
Aye.
Mrs. Sullivan-Weiskamp.
Aye.
Ms. McFarland.
Aye.
Mrs. Webster. Mr. Vanover.
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves.
Aye.
Mr. Anderson.
Aye. The motion to amend Ordinance 22, 2024 to add the emergency clause and related sections is passed with 7 affirmative votes. Next, Mr. Jacobs, if you will please read Ordinance 22, 2024 as amended.
Ordinance number 22, 2024, an ordinance creating Chapter 126 of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Springdale, Ohio, regulating the licensing of marijuana cultivator and processing facilities and marijuana dispensaries and declaring an emergency. Whereas on November 7th, 2023, Ohio voters approved State Issue 2 adopting proposed legislation authorizing the cultivation, sale, and use of marijuana products for recreational purposes, which became law on December 7th, 2023, and has been codified as Sections 3780.01 through 3780.99 of the Ohio Revised Code, the Act. And whereas the Act provides that a newly created division of cannabis shall adopt state rules establishing standards and procedures for the implementation of the adult use marijuana program, including licensing requirements for cultivators, processors, and retailers, which must be adopted within 9 months of December 7th, 2023. And whereas the City Council possesses the power to enact appropriate planning, zoning, and business regulation laws that further the health, safety, and general welfare of its citizens, including restricting, prohibiting, and/or regulating certain business uses in the City of Springdale, the city. And whereas on or about February 21st, 2024, City Council adopted Ordinance 09-2024, a moratorium on the issuance and processing of any permits related to the cultivation, processing, or retail dispensing of adult use marijuana in the city as defined in Sections 3780.01 through 3780.99 of the Ohio Revised Code. And whereas the City Council now seeks to lift that moratorium and adopt certain regulations regarding the location, licensing, and number of marijuana cultivators and dispensaries in the city. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, members elected thereto concurring, Section 1. The moratorium adopted by City Council on February 21st, 2024, known as Ordinance Number 9, 2024, is repealed in its entirety. Section 2, City Council hereby creates and adopts Chapter 126 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Springdale, Ohio, a copy of which is attached as Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference. Section 3, Council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council and of its committees, if any, which result in a formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 4, this ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law. Section 5, that this ordinance shall be an emergency measure necessary for the preservation of the public peace, health, safety, and general welfare, and shall, subject to the terms of Article 2D3D of the Charter, be effective immediately. The reason for the emergency is to ensure immediate implementation of this legislation to begin licensing and regulating this industry as provided in the legislation without any delay.
And there's no public hearing required for this section, correct? Mr. Brown, good. All right, Council, you've heard the reading of amended ordinance 22, 2024. It does have the emergency clause and can be acted on tonight.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions or discussion related to the amended ordinance? All right, seeing none, Ms. Sprout, if you poll council on amended ordinance 22, 2024.
Mrs. Webster? Aye. Mr. Gleaves?
Aye.
Mrs. Sullivan Wisecup?
Aye.
Ms. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Vanover?
Aye.
Mr. Jacobs?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye. Ordinance 22, 2024 with the emergency clause as amended is approved with 7 affirmative votes. All right, next we'll move on to ordinance 23, 2024. This is a second reading. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 23, 2024, an ordinance authorizing the execution of a grant agreement with the State of Ohio Department of Development for participation in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant Brightening Ohio Communities. Whereas the City of Springdale, the city desires to increase energy efficiency initiatives within municipal facilities, and whereas the U.S. Department of Energy has allocated nearly $13.3 million in infrastructure investment and Jobs Act State Energy Program funds to Ohio for energy-related programs, with $3.1 million earmarked for Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Brightening Ohio Communities BOC program. And whereas the Ohio Department of Development is authorized to administer the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant Brightening Ohio Communities program, and whereas the city applied for grant funding through the BOC for lighting upgrades at the community center and municipal building to include LED lighting installations for building exteriors, parking areas, and sports fields and courts, and whereas the Ohio Department of Development has awarded grant funding not to exceed $237,439.75 to the city for energy efficiency initiatives at the community center and municipal building. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring, Section 1, that the city administrator is hereby authorized to execute a grant agreement with the State of Ohio Department of Development for participation in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act State Energy Program Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant Brightening Ohio Communities Program, the agreement, and to execute any and all other documents and agreements consistent with acceptance of the grant and participation in the program. A copy of the agreement is attached as Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference. Section 2. Council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 3, this ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law.
Council, you've heard the reading of ordinance 23, 2024. Can be acted on tonight. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions or discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Sprout, if you poll council on ordinance 23, 2024.
Vanover?
Aye.
Mrs. Sullivan Wisecup?
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves?
Aye.
Mrs. Webster? Aye. Mr. Jacobs?
Aye.
Ms. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye. Ordinance 23, 2024 is approved with 7 affirmative votes. All right, next we have the first reading for ordinance 27, 2024. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 27, 2024, an ordinance authorizing the execution of a grant agreement with the State of Ohio, Ohio Rail Development Commission for participation in the Orphan Rail Crossing Program. Whereas the City of Springdale, the city desires to remove the railroad crossing at Centron Place, which is no longer actively used by rail traffic due to the adjacent track having been removed. And whereas the Ohio Rail Development Commission has been allocated $1 million in funding through the State Transportation Bill HB 33 for the Orphan Rail Crossing Program to address repairs and improvements to rail crossings that are no longer used, abandoned by the railroad, or are currently active but have no clear ownership or responsible party for maintenance. And whereas the Ohio Rail Development Commission is authorized to administer the Orphan Rail Crossing Program. And whereas the city applied for grant funding through the state of Ohio, Ohio Rail Development Commission to remove the track structure at the Centron Place Railroad crossing and restore the roadway within the limits of the crossing. And whereas the Ohio Rail Development Commission has awarded grant funding not to exceed $28,245 to the city for removal of the orphan rail crossing at Centron Place and restoration of the road following removal. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1, that the city administrator is hereby authorized to execute a grant agreement with the state of Ohio, Ohio Rail Development Commission for participation in the orphan rail crossing program, the agreement, and to execute any and all other documents and agreements consistent with the acceptance of the grant and participation in the program. A copy of the agreement is attached as Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference. Section 2, council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council, and if its committees, if any, which result in a formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with all applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 3, this ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law.
Council, this was the first reading. Is there any questions or discussion at this point? All right, seeing none, we will see this ordinance at our next meeting. All right, next we'll move on to ordinance 28, 2024. This does have the emergency clause. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 28, 2024, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to execute a subrecipient grant agreement with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Division of Forestry related to the Inflation Reduction Act Urban and Community Forestry Program and declaring an emergency. Whereas the city of Springdale, the city has an established urban forestry program, and whereas the council of the city through resolution R01-2024 authorized and endorsed the filing of an application through the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Division of Forestry, ODNR, for Inflation Reduction Act grant funding for established trees programs for the inventory of existing trees in their condition of health, planning of maintenance, and care of the trees to maintain the existing tree canopy, and development of planting projects to increase the city's tree canopy. And whereas ODNR has awarded the Ohio's Urban and Community Forestry Grant Sub-Award not to exceed $300,000 to the city for the inventory of existing trees and their condition of health, planning, and maintenance, and care of the trees to maintain the existing tree canopy, and developing of planting projects to increase the city's tree canopy. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1, that the mayor and city administrator are hereby authorized to execute a subrecipient grant agreement with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Division of Forestry related to the Inflation Reduction Act Urban and Community Forest Program, the agreement. A copy of the agreement is attached to Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference. Section 2, council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 3, this ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law. Section 4, that this ordinance shall be an emergency measure necessary for the preservation of public health, peace, safety, and general welfare, and shall, subject to the terms of Article 2D, 3D of the Charter, be effective immediately. The reason for said declaration of emergency is the need to execute the agreement at the earliest possible date in order to have access to the funds being provided and commence the project.
Council, you've heard the reading of ordinance 28, 2024. It does have the emergency clause and can be acted on tonight. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions or discussion? Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd just like to point out there's no local match of any type on this. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Another good grant found by admin. Any other questions or discussion? All right, seeing none, Ms. Browder, if you poll council on ordinance 28, 2024.
Mr. Vanover?
Aye.
Mrs. Sullivan Meiskov?
Aye.
Mrs. Webster? Mr. Jacobs?
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves?
Aye.
Ms. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye. Ordinance 28, 2024 passes with 7 affirmative votes. Again, thank you to administration for finding more money through grants. All right, next we have ordinance 29, 2024. This also has the emergency clause. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 29, 2024, an ordinance authorizing the execution of a grant agreement with the State of Ohio Department of Development for participation in the Advanced Energy Fund Grant Program and declaring an emergency. Whereas the City of Springdale, the city desires to increase energy efficiency initiatives within municipal facilities, and whereas the State of Ohio has allocated $8.5 million to help businesses, nonprofits, municipalities, and more complete energy efficiency projects designed to reduce costs, better the environment, and improve the lives of people in Ohio's communities. And whereas the Ohio Department of Development is authorized to administer the Advanced Energy Fund Grant Program, and whereas the city applied for grant funding through the Advanced Energy Fund Grant Program for lighting upgrades at the community center and municipal building to include LED lighting installations for building exteriors, parking areas, and sports fields and courts, and whereas the Ohio Department of Development has awarded grant funding not to exceed $641,813 to the city for energy efficiency initiatives at the community center and municipal building. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring, Section 1. The city administrator is hereby authorized to execute a grant agreement with the State of Ohio Department of Development for participation in the Advanced Energy Grant Fund Program, the agreement, and to execute any and all other documents and agreements consistent with acceptance of the grant and participation in the program. A copy of the agreement is attached as Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference. Section 2. Council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council, and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 3. This ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law. Section 4, that this ordinance is hereby declared to be an emergency measure necessary for the immediate preservation of public peace, health, safety, and general welfare, and shall be effective immediately upon its passage. The reason for said declaration of emergency is the need to execute the contract prior to the expiration of the state's fiscal year.
Council, you've heard the reading of ordinance 29, 2024. It does have the emergency clause. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions or discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Brown, if you poll council.
Mrs. Sullivan Wisecup?
Aye.
Mr. Vanover?
Aye.
Mrs. Webster? Mr. Jacobs?
Aye.
Ms. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye. Ordinance 29, 2024 passes with 7 affirmative votes. All right, lastly, we have ordinance number 30, 2024. It also has the emergency clause. Mr. Jacobs, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 30, 2024, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into an agreement with Office Furniture Source for the purchase of workstations and accessories for the tax department and declaring an emergency. Whereas the state of Ohio has advertised and received bids for the purchase of workstations and accessories, and whereas Office Furniture Source was determined to be the best bidder through the state of Ohio's purchasing consortium with a price of $74,695.52 for the purchase of workstations and accessories. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring, Section 1, that the City of Springdale accepts the state specifications and agrees that Office Furniture Source is the best bidder for the purchase of the workstations and accessories. Section 2, that the mayor and city administrator are hereby authorized to enter into an agreement with Office Furniture Source for the purchase of workstations and accessories for use by the City of Springdale Tax Department, the agreement. Section 3, that the finance officer is hereby authorized to pay Office Furniture Source a sum not to exceed $74,695.52 for said workstations and accessories consistent with the agreement. Section 4, council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council, and if its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 5, that this ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law. Section 6, that this ordinance is hereby declared to be an emergency measure necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, health, safety, and general welfare, and shall be effective immediately upon its passage. The reason for said declaration of emergency is the need to execute the contract prior to the expiration of the bid price.
Council, you've heard the reading of ordinance 30, 2024. It does have the emergency clause and can be acted on tonight. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
I've got Mr. Vanover with the motion to adopt. Did you want a second? I've got Ms. Webster seconded.
Thank you.
All right, moved and seconded. Are there any questions or discussion? All right, seeing none, Ms. Brown, if you poll council
Mr.
on
Vanover?
ordinance 30, 2024.
Aye.
Mrs. Webster? Mr. Jacobs?
Aye.
Mrs. Sullivan Wisecup?
Aye.
Mrs. McFarland? I'm sorry.
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye. Ordinance 30, 2024 passes with 7 affirmative votes. All right.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion to go to executive session on our Article 2D1 of the Springdale Charter to discuss economic development issues.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions or discussion about moving to executive session? All right, seeing none, Ms. Brown, if you poll council, move to executive session.
Mrs. Sullivan Wisecup?
Aye.
Mr. Vanover?
Aye.
Ms. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Gleaves?
Aye.
Mr. Jacobs?
Aye.
Mrs. Webster? Mr. Anderson?
Aye. Council's in executive session. Administration, do we expect action out of this? No? All right, we will be back. Council has returned from executive session. Next, we'll move on to old business. Is there any old business to bring before council? All right, seeing none. New business. Is there any new business? Mr. Vanover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make the request that we bring forward legislation dealing with the ticket tax that we have on the books right now and make adjustments accordingly.
All right, there's a recommendation to take a look at our ticket tax and that process that's in place there. Do we think it's appropriate to send that to Rules and Law? Have them look at it, or is that something you think that it's simple enough that Mr. Braun could just take a look at it and give feedback to council as a whole? I'm not sure what exactly you had in mind.
Well, Mr. Braun's going to be the one ultimately drawing it up, so I think we can let him do his magic, and if we have concerns, questions, concerns, then we can deal with it.
Mr. Braun, do you have a preference if we send it just to the committee, or just do you want to take a look at that section and make recommendations back to council?
I'm comfortable doing that, and I guess I'll throw out there, if you don't like it, because it's going to be minor adjustments, you could always amend it.
All right, well, I'm going to propose that we just have Mr. Braun take that action unless anybody else has feedback they'd want to give at this point. Ms. Webster, is this related to that or a different topic?
Please?
Is your call light to this topic?
Yes. Oh, no, not that, no.
Oh, that's fine.
You stuck that in on me.
You're fine. I just want to make sure. All right, so let's go ahead and do that, Mr. Braun. If you take a look at our ticket tax ordinances and make sure if there's any updates we need to do, if we could prepare ordinances back to council as a whole. All right, any other new business? Ms. Webster.
I think we have a need for a resolution brought in at our next meeting, since we have someone on this dais retiring. And I would like to request we bring one in from Mr. John J. Jones, our city administrator.
So if we can, I'm not hearing any objections so far to that. If we can make sure we're working on that ordinance too to recognize Mr. Jones' contribution. Is the next meeting, is it really that soon, or do we have some more time? Mr. Jones, you've got a timer, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm retiring the 19th of August, and I've been asked by the administration to come back on the meeting of the 22nd of August.
Okay.
Or 21st of August, I should say. I appreciate the request, but I do plan to return, not on the dais, but I do plan to return for the August 21st meeting.
Would it be all right if we prepared an ordinance to that like and prepare it for the August meeting, just to make sure we recognize the work that you've done? All right.
So you want to wait till that, when you're coming back?
I'm just doing what I was told.
I don't know who told you that.
All right.
But I thought you would want it read.
It will be read. He'll be here. We'll prepare for that meeting. All right. Any other new business? And to that last point, if anyone has things that they want to make sure are included in that ordinance on the dais, just make sure you reach out to Mr. Braun with any of those salient points. If there's something you want to make sure gets recognized in there, we can work it in. All right. Any other new business? All right, seeing none, if we can move on to meetings and announcements. Ms. Sullivan-Westcott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Planning Commission will meet in these chambers on Tuesday, July 9th at 7 p.m.
Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're looking to have a town hall meeting on September the 11th, 2024 at 7 p.m. The idea is for elected officials to be present and available if they choose to. I already know that myself and President Anderson will be present. No one should feel obligated to come. If they want to come, they may come and open up to the community for interactive questions and discussions at that time. So again, folks can put down their calendar September 11th, 2024, 7 p.m. This will be down at the Rec Center. We'll have more information to come. Again, do not feel that you have to participate, but it's an opportunity if folks choose to. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's a large Q&A we've talked about in the past. So it's an opportunity for people to come in a little less formally to talk to council, just in a structured thing so people can plan for it. Some people might not want to come and just address council. It allows more time there. So it's just an opportunity. All right, Mr. Vanover.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a reminder that we start our summer schedule next month, so our meeting would be on the 17th. And actually, I guess question Mr. Jones, because the third meeting, or third Thursday, or I'm sorry, third Wednesday, yeah, in August is the 21st.
Yeah. All right. Mr. Yule.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to reaffirm what Mr. Coleman reported earlier, and just to remind everyone, the Civil Service Commission meeting scheduled in July will be on July the 11th at 2 p.m. in the council conference room.
Mr. Gleaves.
Thank you, Mr. President. The BZA meeting scheduled for June 25th has been canceled. The next scheduled meeting is July 23rd in these chambers at 7 p.m. That's all I have.
All right. Not seeing any other announcements. Next, we'll go ahead and move on to communications from the audience. This is the second opportunity for anyone in the audience who would like to address council for any reason. Again, you just simply come up to the dais, sign in, state your name and address, and you can address council. The floor is now open for communications from the audience. Second call. Third and final call. All right, I'm closing communications from the audience. Next, we'll turn to Mr. Jacobs for a recap of legislative items and legislation in development in whichever order makes the most sense.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you review your internal memorandums, item 1 was addressed by ordinance 21-2024, an ordinance approving a zoning code text amendment to remove the prohibition of medical marijuana cultivation, processing, and retail dispensaries, and to adopt text amendments to allow for the location of marijuana dispensaries, processing, and cultivation businesses in the city of Springdale and declaring an emergency. That passed with 7 affirmative votes. Item 2 was addressed by ordinance 22-2024, an ordinance creating Chapter 126 of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Springdale, Ohio, regulating the licensing of marijuana cultivator and processing facilities and marijuana dispensaries and declaring an emergency, and that passed with 7 affirmative votes. Item 3 was addressed by ordinance 23-2024, an ordinance authorizing the execution of a grant agreement with the State of Ohio Department of Development for participation in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant Brightening Ohio Communities, and that passed with 7 affirmative votes. Item 4 was addressed by ordinance 28-2024, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to execute a subrecipient grant agreement with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Division of Forestry, related to the Inflation Reduction Act, Urban and Community Forestry Program, and declaring an emergency. And I believe, let's check. Was that did we have to do a first reading on that, or did that pass with 7 affirmative votes? I apologize. I believe
27 had a first reading, all the others.
Okay, yeah, 28 passed with 7 affirmative votes. My apologies. Item 5 was addressed by ordinance 29-2024, an ordinance authorizing the execution of a grant agreement with the State of Ohio Department of Development for participation in the Advanced Energy Fund Grant Program and declaring an emergency, and that passed with 7 affirmative votes. Item 6 was addressed by ordinance 30-2024, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and city administrator to enter into an agreement with Office Furniture Source for the purchase of workstations and accessories for the tax department and declaring an emergency. That passed with 7 affirmative votes. Item 7 was addressed by ordinance 27-2024, an ordinance authorizing the execution of a grant agreement with the State of Ohio, Ohio Rail Development Commission for participation in the Orphan Rail Crossing Program, and that was a first reading. Anything from administration?
Okay, are we good? All right, then all that's left before us, I'm sorry, there was something from Mayor Hawkins first.
Thank you, Mr. President. One more thing that we'll be requesting for council or dealing with will be a request for an ordinance regarding a contract for the new administrator.
And the timing of that, we'd want to take a look at that at the next meeting for a first reading, and there'll be enough time to do it.
It would be coming through with an emergency because it's going to be the only meeting we have in July preceding August 19th.
Okay, so we should expect it within most of cause based on the timeline. All right, so if we can make sure we get that out ahead of time, just in case we have questions, we can deal with that before the meeting as much as possible, since we have one shot at it. All right. All right, any other items before we move on? All right, seeing none, all we have left is item 18.
Move to adjourn.
All right, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.